We're going to continue our series of mayoral leadership, important initiatives taken by mayors that have produced quality outcomes for their cities. And today we're talking to Mayor Joe Curtatone from the great city of Somerville. Mayor, you received a fair amount of attention about your performance measurements and your budgeting. Why don't you start by telling us and the folks watching why these were important and why you picked these particular issues as ones of interest to you?
Well, I served 8 years on the Board of Aldermen, which was the city's legislative body. I also served as the chair of the Finance Committee. We were a city, like many municipalities, in crisis, fiscal crisis. We had just, back in 2003, we had got cut 20% of our local aid, which local aid made up 40% of our revenues to our budget. So when you have, during difficult times, your deficiencies, structural deficiencies or financial deficiencies become glaringly obvious. And what was obvious to us is that we weren't managing for results. I sort of describe our management style as driving a car blindfolded. We had a budget process. There's a line item budget, where nothing was aligned to any outcomes or measures. It wasn't descriptive. There were no goals and objectives. So if you were a department head in our public works department, you came before the Finance Committee at budget time. If you had $50,000 left in a line item, you could rest your bottom dollar, we cut it. So your only incentive was to spend down before you got to us. You didn't have to justify your spending. You didn't have to speak as to what goals and objectives you have reached or did not reach. There was no accountability, no transparency. Becoming mayor, when I ran for mayor, I knew there was an absolute need to manage on a real-time basis, using data, reforming the budget process, and manage for results.
Now, you've used something called Somerstat. Is that what you've just described, or is that kind of a different issue?
Somerstat is a major management tool we implemented, which was based off CityStat, which was based off CompStat in New York City, a crime model. And really, what it does is you use data available at your hands, at your fingertips, to set policies, evaluate programs. We meet bi-weekly, sometimes monthly with particular departments, and we evaluate personnel data, and other, I'll evaluate their data towards their goals and objectives to discuss where they are in the budget and where they are in terms of achieving certain goals and objectives. For instance, when we meet with Public Works, we'll want to know how many potholes they filled. We want to know where they are in terms of their overtime spending. And again, we evaluate the effectiveness of programs and policies, and we evaluate the performance of managers. So it's really an incredible policy that set a new level of accountability and transparency now in our management.
So it seems to me there are three components I'd kind of like to have you explain a little bit. You've got the budgeting, the activity-based costing budgeting component. You've got the performance component. You have a transparency component. Could you just take us through the three of those quickly?
I'm a true believer in the use of data and information to manage for results. And otherwise, you're just, again, driving the car blindfolded. We would make decisions in the past on a yearly basis or on a crisis basis when a crisis has reached a peak, and now you're having to react to the crisis. Managing on a real-time basis and using our bi-weekly meetings with department heads to understand where they are in the budget process. If we know there's a trend in an overtime account that we need to address, we'll address that on a team basis. If we know there's a contractual consequence on a particular department, we'll meet collectively to figure out a solution to that. We'll also know if a particular program in our recreation department was as successful based on participation and data from those involved. And we line that up with our goals and objectives in our budget process. It's really set up an incredible model for managers to manage for results, and to share that information with decision makers and the public. We also bring in our 311 call information from our constituents, so we understand trends and needs of constituents as they align with our budget, or as we begin to set priorities for programs and policies moving into the next budget process.
So then you've got activity costing. How did you go about defining what the activities were? Because it feels like you have to have if you're going to measure performance, you have to be able to define the activities. So how did you put all that together?
Well, in the traditional line item budget, you didn't know what those activities were.
Right.
I tell the story. I served 8 years on the Board of Aldermen when I became mayor. I'd ask you, your department, well, what do you guys do? Because I really don't know. I know you plow the streets and you pick up the trash, but what else do you do? And what we began a transformation working in partnership with Professor Linda Bilmes and the Kennedy School of Government. We had a great project with our budgeting class in transforming our budget from a traditional line item budget to a performance-based budget, performance based on results, and we'll get down to activity costing as we move forward. Now, every budget, every department, in addition to traditional line item, will have a descriptive account of what those activities are. So we did what was called activity mapping. Well, what do you do? Well, if in your department, well, we pick up the trash. What is involved in that activity? And how do we align outputs and outcomes to the activity? And what other measures can we put in place? So every cost on spending is justified and aligned with a particular goal and objective and or outcome.
Good. Let me, just a couple more questions. So you have this really remarkable set of activities designed to kind of transform the quality and quantity, I guess, of city services. Why did you choose this group of things to invest your political capital and personal leadership? And what were the obstacles that it required you as mayor to do as contrasted to some of the folks working for you? So how did you invest your time to cause this change in city performance and budgeting to occur?
Well, I'm a big believer in managing for results, and I'm also a believer in taking the best practices of the public and private sector and bringing them into municipal government. There's no reason why municipal government can't function as the best businesses in the private sector do. And there's some great models. And I look at the best practices in Indianapolis and Baltimore and around the country and in the private sector, whether they be on performance-based budgeting or management and customer service, and wanted to bring them into Somerville. And how did I drive to complete that? And I ran for mayor, and I set that as my goal and objective, that we were going to transform how government works. Government was going to work for the constituent, for the customer, for the people. We were going to manage for results for them. We were going to spend their dollars, tax dollars wisely. We were going to treat every person who accesses city services or wishes to access city services with courtesy and with respect. And again, we're going to set up a level of transparency and accountability that has never been in place in Somerville, and it will set a new level of a great example for other municipalities across the country.
So last question, if folks, new mayors or city leaders of some sort want to copy the Somerville model, how would you advise them to start, and what would be the biggest obstacle they have to overcome?
Well, I think in terms of obstacles, it's a cultural change at the end of the day. You need to be mayoral, and you need to set the tone. Your constituents want you to be successful, and even your colleagues do. It was a learning process for the rank and file, but at the end of the day, their morale has been uplifted. We've been able to restaff particular departments. We're able to give them better tools and equipment to work with. So we're able to justify our successes with our results. In terms of how to approach it, I think they should look at the best practices around the country. They certainly can contact me in Somerville, www.somervillema.gov. They can go through the U.S. Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities, and take the best practices for the municipalities. I certainly visited Baltimore. I worked for the Kennedy School. I went to academia and really started to transform and reform how city government operates.
Mayor, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Successes.